rising storm. I'm forged in the fire, a new heart reborn. With every breath, with every stride, God, I'm your warrior, with you as my guide. Through the valleys of shadow, through the rising storm, I'm forged in the fire, a new heart reborn.
Okay, so something I want to talk about that I haven't heard any discussion about with as far as concerning Suzie and Chris Skinner is the caregiver neglect, and if whether or not she should face charges on her neglect of Chris Skinner. Now, we just heard the newest interview that she had with detectives or the coroner, somebody. She had, anyway, we heard that. And she states in that she's the one that does everything. The only one. So, if she is, which regardless if she had help or not, she was still the primary caregiver. And she failed Chris and neglected Chris. And not just like emotional neglect or anything, but actual physical neglect. And caused him to be in danger and was very harmful to Chris. So, I'm wondering why that was never brought up, and she really needs to face charges for that. Because if she's the primary caregiver and she's the one in the home with him, and she's the one that gives him the medication, and she's the one that feeds him, she's the one that bathes him, she's the one that does everything. So, and then I got to looking at the caregiver neglect. Now, I know it says on here elder abuse, but it's not just elderly people, obviously. Chris wasn't an elderly. He was young and he wasn't the best of health, but he still was fighting. So, and he was still able to do quite a bit, So, but caregiver neglect is a form of elderly abuse where a caregiver fails to meet the basic needs of an older adult, leading to potential harm. Now, if she quit bathing him, and then, we know about bed sores and things like that, and Chris had said that he had been getting a lot of bed sores. That's from not moving. That's from staying in one spot for a long period of time. And if you're not bathing and cleaning and everything, the wounds are getting infected. And if he's not being bathed and cleaned and everything, there's a lot of contamination going on. So, and this can include failing to provide food, which we learned that Suzie did fail to provide him food. He had shelter, clothing. He was wearing the same clothes over and over. The clothes that, Suzie wasn't changing them or anything, and he had filthy clothes on. And failing to provide, access to health care or ignoring emotional, physical, or social needs. Active neglect. Deliberate failure to provide necessary care, such as abandonment or withholding essential resources. Okay, so she was deliberately not taking care of Chris. And she was not providing the basics and the necessary care. She was abandoning him to go and check them grass on the other side, thinking it's greener. But I mean, Suzie knew what she was getting into. I know that. Suzie knew exactly what she was getting into, and she still chose to go, and she chose to neglect her wonderful husband and her beautiful children. So, signs and symptoms: dehydration or malnutrition. We know that he was. And he was malnourished. He was, asking his mom and, other people if they could bring him something to eat. And, like the man was starving. Poor personal hygiene or unsanitary living conditions. Chris was being forced to live in poor personal hygiene and unsanitary living conditions. His chair, the place where he slept, clothes, everything was just filth. And Suzie would not clean him up or help him or anything. Lack of medication. So Suzie was missing medications, doubling up on medications, doing different things with medication. She says it in the interview. Lack of medical appointments. Emotional neglect, such as ignoring or belittling the older adult. We know Suzie was emotionally neglecting him because she was too busy running around with J.P. Diddy. Chris even, said something to J.P. Diddy like, hey, leave my wife and kids alone. Because Chris had already seen, like, a while ago that something wasn't right, and something wasn't sitting right. And he's already, telling people things and, so, let's see. Low social support for the caregiver. She had support. She had Chris's family, and I don't know too much about Suzie's family, which is, I guess, odd, but not odd, I guess. Let's see, and then report the situation to authorities. What are examples of neglect and care? Can a caregiver get in trouble? Elderly loved ones. Well, we're going to say disabled because Chris wasn't elderly. Loved ones and even other family members occasionally accuse caregivers of abuse. Even if their claims are not accurate, the accused caregiver usually faces legal troubles. Why isn't Suzie facing legal troubles? She neglected just Chris's basic needs. Just basic. Making sure he's clean, fed, stayed hydrated. So I'm gonna dig a little bit more in on this, and oh look, Department of Justice. Yeah, because Suzie, you neglected your sweet, wonderful husband, and you chose evil, and I don't feel sorry for you, and I don't care what other people say about that. They can try and defend you and, tell you to come back over here to this side or whatever. You knew what you were doing, Suzie. Alright, here's some more. And this goes more with Chris because he was disabled. He wasn't elderly, he was disabled. So, and it is illegal. And y'all know that Suzie also got paid to be said caregiver for Chris. I don't know how much she would have got paid. It might not have been much or whatever, but either way, she had a job that she failed to do. And it resulted in Chris being deathly ill, being hungry, dehydrated, filthy, bed sores. She was not doing her job, not even as a wife. and she wasn't providing Chris with the basic needs or medical care. See, what are 3 indicators of abuse in people with disability? Social and... Alright, remember I was talking about isolation in the last video. If he's not being cleaned and he's wearing the same filthy clothes and, you know, he's not going to want to go out in the world. He's not want to go and, you know, take a ride or take the dog for a walk or anything. I mean, Chris liked to look nice. You know, he liked to be well presented. He wanted to be presentable. Like, you know, he didn't want to go out in the world and be nasty. Even, you know, though it wasn't his fault that he was, you know, in that situation. It was, you know, that's on Suzie. You know, so that's isolation. Confusion regarding property, belongings, or surroundings. Older people or adults with disabilities who do not have the ability to self-advocate. And Chris did try to self-advocate. Families that take advantage of the older person or adult with disability and their assets. What is medical neglect of a disabled person? A negligent act or omission by an individual responsible for providing services in a facility, rendering care or treatment which caused or may have caused injury to an individual served, or which placed an individual at risk of injury, and includes the act or omission such as the failure to carry out an appropriate... Is there more to that? I don't know. What to do if someone is taking advantage of a disabled person? What makes disability abuse laws? Why was Suzie... I mean, I don't know if she was or not. I mean, I'm not saying this to be fact, but I mean... But no one of my knowledge spoke out. You know, I mean, they did, I guess, like, after the fact, or maybe even before the fact, and law enforcement and, you know, other people just kind of brushing underneath the rug and says, no, you know, we're not going to put all that because that's just more paperwork, and we just want it, you know, done and over with, so that way we can go on to the next case and be done with it, you know. So, let's see. And I do believe there's a couple felonies in there too for that kind of abuse. Now, I'm in Alabama, obviously, and so my phone now picks up, like, because I'm looking a lot in Myrtle or South Carolina and stuff, so sometimes it'll give me South Carolina laws, and then sometimes it'll give me Alabama. Let's see, disability abuse laws in South Carolina. Alright. In South Carolina, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of vulnerable adults are covered by the Omnibus Adult Protection Act. This act defines a vulnerable adult, which Chris was, as anyone age 18 or older with a physical or mental condition impairing their ability to care for themselves. The law requires reporting of suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and includes penalties for those who are knowingly abuse or neglect a vulnerable adult, resulting in death. Alright, well, Suzie, I think you got more charges coming than you might realize, and if you don't, I'm gonna make sure I yell pretty loud, even from where I'm at now, to make sure that everyone knows the neglect and abuse that you did to Chris. so sad, Suzie. And to hurt your children in that way. Where were your children at this time, Suzie? Did you somehow, like, maybe even have the kids go stay somewhere else while you were neglecting your husband? And also, I don't know, maybe, speculating here, maybe tell Chris, like, hey, he ain't gonna see his kids, or, putting stuff in his head and everything because he decided to be a man, or he didn't decide, he was a man, and he stood up to J.P. Diddy. Because you had a husband that loved and cherished you and was a great man, Suzie. And you chose J.P. Diddy over Chris and your own children that you gave birth to. I don't even know what to say. Suzie, if you want people to feel bad for you, we're not. You did this. You and J.P. Diddy did this. Just fess up.
Could you provide an overview of what Adult Protective Services actually does?
Yes, Adult Protective Services will get a referral for abuse, neglect, financial exploitation. In some states, they even investigate reports of self-neglect. The basic things that APS is looking for is they're looking at my capacity, mental capacity. Do I appear to have the ability to give informed consent? If I'm dependent, in what way am I dependent? Do I need help with activities of daily living, independent activities of daily living? What is it that I can do for myself that I can't do for myself? And as important, for those things that I can't do for myself, am I able to manage that? Am I able to get someone to help me? And then they're looking to substantiate whether abuse, neglect, or exploitation happened. So in that whole package, they're looking at capacity, dependency, and they're looking to investigate abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation.
Is there an Adult Protective Services in every state?
Yes, there is, in all 50 states.
And is that governed by state or federal law?
State laws, and it varies, and that's the interesting thing with Adult Protective Services. There isn't a federal mandate similar to what people are used to with Child Protective Services, for example, where definitions are the same and a lot of data collection. So that's why I would encourage people, no matter what state you're in, is to take a look at the Adult Protective Services Act or the enabling legislation to look at that. It varies. It varies on who they investigate. Some, for example, are 18 and older, because it's based on incapacity and dependency, and some are based on age, and some of it is 60 or 65.
Adult Protective Services receives referrals from the community, and anybody in the community can make a referral. Adult Protective Service workers go out in the field and they investigate the client in their environment, the environment where they're being abused. So they go out to determine whether abuse is indeed occurring, and that can be through interviewing the person who's allegedly abused, any person in that person's surrounding, neighbors, friends, relatives, doctors. So the interview and the investigation is quite extensive. We work with law enforcement to help investigate this, because there's a social service perspective and there's a law enforcement perspective, but we work collaboratively to investigate these allegations. There are clients who have capacity, and those are clients who don't have capacity. If you're determined to have capacity, you have the right to self-determination, which means you can make a decision that people don't agree with. But when you don't have capacity, that's where it changes a bit, because then we may have to go for a more restrictive intervention, which means we might even have to go to court for guardianship if we feel like you're making bad decisions based on your capacity issues.
I often hear what appears to me to be a confusion between a law enforcement investigation and an Adult Protective Services investigation. And it sounds like they're two different things. Can you describe some of those differences?
Yes, Adult Protective Services is a social work perspective in some jurisdictions, where we go out to see socially what's going on. We are not there to prove abuse. We're not there to determine whether somebody has broken the law, but we're going there to determine whether or not someone has a social service need.
Well, the police would look into whether a crime has occurred. So that's our role. And if a crime's occurred, like I said, investigate it and pursue it. While the SHS, or Adult Protective Services, their role is more of a civil investigation. So it would be, for example, if a vulnerable adult has a caregiver and that caregiver has not fulfilled their obligations or is neglecting or abusing the vulnerable adult, then they would have their own civil administrative hearings to try maybe and remove this caregiver. And their track is a civil track, and our track as police is a criminal, whether we are going to have a criminal case or not.
We need to do a better job about what we think abuse and neglect and exploitation might be. It may be in the Adult Protective Services statute, but it certainly might not be in the criminal statute. Law enforcement is asking us, what's the crime? Tell me, I'll investigate. And APS is saying, well, this person's been abused, investigate and prosecute, when maybe that doesn't even go together. So there is a difference. We need to tie Adult Protective Services and that investigation of whether I have capacity and whether I've been abused and neglected to what are those criminal statutes that our partners in law enforcement can help us come in and gather evidence and prosecute.
Okay, so I'm trying to kind of like narrow down our search to kind of, you know, divide the elderly and, you know, like someone in Chris's situation where he was young and full of life, and, you know, he just so happened to be a quadriplegic and disabled. So, let's see. This is abuse, neglect, and this is from the Disability Rights South Carolina.org website. And Disability Rights South Carolina Protection and Advocacy. Alright, abuse. Abuse is a inappropriate treatment of an individual. It includes physical, psychological, emotional, and sexual abuse. Alright, the sexual abuse, I can't comment on that because I don't know one way or another on that aspect of it. But we do know that Suzie did inappropriate treatment of Chris that included physical, psychological, and emotional abuse. Physical abuse is the use of physical force that may result in bodily injury, physical pain, or impairment. Examples include striking with or without an object, hitting, beating, pushing, shoving, shaking, slapping, kicking, pinching, burning, inappropriate use of drugs and physical restraints, force feeding, and physical punishment. Now, whether or not Suzie laid hands on him in a violent manner that way, I do not know. But I do know that in Chris's situation, he had to be moved and, you know, different things in order not to have bodily harm, which would be like the bed sores and infections and, you know, skin breaks and lacerations and things, you know. So that to me would fall under the physical because it's putting wounds onto his body. Alright, psychological or emotional abuse. Alright, we know that Suzie did psychological and emotionally abuse Chris. Is causing anguish, pain, or distress to another person through verbal or nonverbal acts. Examples include verbal assaults, insults, threats, intimidation, humiliation, and harassment. And then as far as the SA, I can't speak on that one. Neglect is the refusal or failure of a caregiver to provide for the needs of a child or vulnerable adult. Needs and care, goods and services necessary to maintain a health and safety of an individual includes, or examples include, lack of food, check. Water, check. Clothing, check. Medicine, check. Shelter, they had their family home that they lived in, which Suzie Sloozy is selling. So, and I'm pretty sure she's not gonna share any of that money with Chris's family and, you know, any of that. Supervision, personal safety, personal hygiene, and medical services. Neglect can be repeated conduct or a single incident when the result could be serious physical or psychological harm or substantial risk of death. Exploitation. Exploitation is taking improper advantage of an individual. It can involve finances, marital, labor, or activity. Okay, so we know finances, check. Marital, check. Financial or marital exploitation is the improper, illegal, or unauthorized use of an individual's funds, assets, property, power of attorney, guardianship, or conservatorship to the profit or advantage of anyone besides the individual. Examples include cashing someone's checks without permission, forging someone's signature, misusing or stealing someone's money or possessions, and coercing. I know what I'm trying to say here. Someone's money or possessions. Let's see. Okay, and coercing or deceiving someone into signing any document. Let's talk about that. Deceiving someone into signing any document. Ooh. That's for somebody was doing that with Mica too. And so I guess Suzie and JP Diddy learned a lot from each other. They're just two peas in a pod. And I know Suzie was trying real hard to get that DNR on the hush hush in South Carolina and Virginia. Let's see. Misusing or stealing someone's money. She was misusing and stealing from her family. Taking proceeds and things like, or taking things out of the home, you know, money-wise and things, and giving it to JP Diddy, or AKA Solid Rock Church. So, and even after death, Suzie wanted all funds that people wanted to give to help her and the children. She denied it. She wanted all of that. All of that, y'all. Like, F them kids, she said. And give that money to Solid Rock. Give that money to the church. Now, can y'all believe that? I think I'd be saving up everything I could, and, you know, the insurance, like anything I got from my children's father. I would be like, my kids are gonna be okay, you know, like financially anyway. They got the stress and the burden and everything of already losing a parent, and the one parent that loved and cared for them, you know. And, you know, at least one thing I can do to help take a burden off is financial, and that would be to set my kids up for a good future. Not pawn off my kids and take from them. And yes, I consider what she is doing and did is taking from her children, and she's neglecting them and giving it all to JP Diddy and Solid Rock. Now, how does that make sense? I thought JP Diddy owned, like, you know, I don't know how many businesses and had all this stuff and, you know, worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. What about your children, Suzie? Well, we know she wasn't provided. She had stopped providing, what is it? Rehab, physical therapy. So, now as far as marks or anything on his body, any kind of injuries, I don't know. I don't know, so I'm not gonna speak on things. I might ask a question or, you know, something I don't know about, but I'm not gonna tell you something or really, you know, if I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna do that. Psychological or emotional abuse, emotionally upset or agitated, extremely and unusually withdrawn, not communicating or not responding, unusual childlike behavior, sucking, biting, rocking, which I don't. An individual's report of being verbally or emotionally mistreated, which Chris did reach out to people and tell them, you know, things that Suzie was doing. We know that, you know, things were being done to emotionally upset Chris. And, you know, she was having Chris withdraw. So she was doing things, setting things up in order for these multiple plans that they had. Because remember, they got plans, but they also got backups for the backup plans. So, let's see. Neglect, dehydration, malnutrition, untreated bed sores, or personal hygiene. Check. Suzie. Unattended or untreated health problems. Check. Suzie, you didn't tend to them. You just completely abandoned them. Hazardous or unsafe living condition, arrangements, improper wiring, no heat or no running water. All right. Now, they probably had heat and they probably had running water, so I mean, that would be irrelevant. But she did have him in a hazardous and unsafe living condition, because he was not kept clean. His basic needs were not being met. He was getting bed sores, infections. He was in so much pain from that. And Chris tried to tell people, you know, and that he even spoke about JP and, you know, so many things. And you know what? Another thing that law enforcement needs to look into is bank statements. And if any of this would, you know, was any of this stuff done? You know, in the midst of Chris being neglected and, you know, his doom being planned. So, sudden changes in bank account or banking practice, including an unexplained withdrawal of large sums of money by a person accompanying the individual. Now, their home. Chris's name, from what I remember, I don't know if it was ever on the house, but I know at the time when Suzie was selling it, his name was not. Now, usually when you're married, or usually when I'm gonna tell y'all a little story. So when me and my husband was buying our house, you know, I've always like never wanted my name on nothing. I was in hiding for a while, y'all, and so I didn't want anything that could trace my name to where I lived, or, you know, anything like that. I'm not in hiding anymore, so I'm out, obviously, of hiding. And but when it came to the house, you know, they said, well, if anything was to happen, you know, like pretty much the house would just go to the state. So, or, you know, this, and there's some other legal things too. So I ended up agreeing to have my name put on the house, but I had it put in a way to where you can't just look me up that easily. So if that makes any sense to y'all. Addition of names on an individual's bank signature card, unauthorized withdrawal or funds with an ATM card, abrupt changes in a will or other financial documents. That's very important, y'all. Unexplained disappearance of funds and valuable possessions. I would like that to be investigated. They need to check into that stuff. Substandard care being provided or bills unpaid despite the availability of adequate financial resources. I'm not sure on their bills, so I'm not gonna, I don't know. Discovery of forged signature or documents. Which we know somebody else was trying to do that as well with their wife. Sudden appearance of previously uninvolved relatives claiming rights to an individual's affairs and positions. I don't believe there was a sudden appearance. I believe that Chris's family was and has always been around. It was just spun in another narrative, which Suzie, if there's nothing to hide, why hide all of these things? That the family was there, the family helped, you know, that you didn't see the video of Chris, what happened to Chris, but somehow, some way you knew that he supposedly got too close and was sitting there and his wheel slipped in. And you also know that y'all had been fighting with the HOA and there was no lawsuit that you filed on that. What else? Oh, that's right. That he fell asleep. So, which one is it, Suzie? So many lies. Sudden appearance of, okay, we already read that one. Unexplained sudden transfer of assets to family member or someone outside the family. Solid rock. Provision of service that are not necessary. I'm not sure. An individual's report of exploitation. Alright, I think I've made a pretty good point by now. So, why hasn't Suzie been charged with neglect, and why hasn't that been talked about? You know, I mean, we got some content creators telling, you know, Suzie like, oh, you know, just come forward and, you know, we'll save you and this and that and the other and da da da, but she is on the same level as someone else in this case. Suzie is not a victim. I'm sorry, she is not a victim. Chris was a victim. Mica was a victim. Jane Doe 1 and 2 are victims. Big difference. So I'm going to go ahead and go. And if today's your birthday, happy birthday. And I love y'all. And I will talk to y'all soon. Thank you. Bye. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know your thoughts. And if today's your birthday, happy birthday!